if you feel like the ground underneath our social structures is, well, shifting, you're definitely not alone. Our sources are suggesting this change. It actually demands a total rethink of leadership, the style, the role, everything.
Yeah, it's way beyond just tweaking things here and there, isn't it? We're looking past the usual organizational charts.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, our mission is really to reflect on the spiritual concept of leadership. What's its actual duty, according to these sources?
Right. We're drawing a lot from spiritual philosophical texts here, especially the Grail message. And the core question they keep posing is, what fundamental law needs to govern this new era we're moving into?
Okay. And they have an answer.
They do. And it defines this new primary duty for anyone in a leadership position. It's not about profit margins, not about popularity polls.
So what is it then?
It's about creating and nurturing an environment that actively sustains and enables the spiritual development of everyone in that community.
Spiritual development. Okay, let's pin that down a bit. What does that mean in this context? Because, that term can mean different things to different people.
Good point. Here it means fostering a person's inner peace, their self-awareness, really helping them gain mastery over their own inner nature. It's about inner growth.
Okay, inner growth. And this environment you mentioned, it has rules.
Absolutely. It has to be governed by what the sources call the laws of creation. Think of them as, like, immutable, fundamental principles, not just human policies that change with the wind.
Immutable laws.
Oh.
Okay. So which one is key here? What's the central law of creation we need to focus on for this new era?
The sources really highlight one above all, the law of giving and taking. You might also call it the law of balance.
The law of balance.
Yeah.
Giving and taking. It sounds almost deceptively simple, doesn't it? Taking must match giving.
It does sound simple.
But if it's that straightforward, why isn't it just how things work already, everywhere?
Because it's a natural law, and like any natural law, it demands really strict application. Everywhere. Business, family, social stuff, no exceptions.
Okay.
And here's the crucial bit, the nuance that often gets missed. This balance, it has to apply to both sides, the giving act and the receiving act. Responsibility isn't just on the giver.
Both sides. Okay, let's unpack that. How does that dual responsibility actually play out? Give me an example. Let's start with giving.
Okay, well, the parent-child relationship is a classic example the sources use. A parent applying this law wouldn't just give a child anything they want. Right. They wouldn't give something the child hasn't earned or, deserved in some way, especially if it could actually harm their spiritual development, their inner growth.
Harm their development by giving too much.
Exactly. And you can immediately see how that connects to, say, the modern workplace.
How so?
The sources specifically warn against what they call excessive and demoralizing compensation.
Demoralizing. That sounds counterintuitive. Don't people want more compensation?
Well, yes, but the argument is that excessive pay that's completely out of whack with the actual contribution, can push the receiver into a life of, reckless extravagance. It undermines their inner balance.
Because the taking wildly exceeds the giving, the effort.
Precisely. The act of giving too much, even if you think you have good intentions, creates harm because it violates that fundamental law of balance.
Okay, but hang on. How can an employer possibly figure out the needs for an employee's spiritual growth when they're setting pay?
Yeah.
I mean, that seems incredibly subjective. It flies in the face of how we usually think about compensation, like market rates and stuff.
It does challenge the current model, absolutely. It requires a shift towards an inward assessment from everyone involved.
An inward assessment?
Yeah. The sources suggest that if employees themselves are guided by a deeper, maybe spiritual awareness, they'll naturally set expectations that are balanced. Expectations commensurate with an honest look at their own contribution.
And the employer's role.
The employer, also guided by this sense of balance, sets compensation that matches that contribution, but also considers what supports the employee's overall balanced life and, yes, their spiritual growth. Not in a prescriptive way, but by fostering fairness and avoiding that harmful excess.
So the goal shifts from just maximizing profit or just getting the highest salary towards mutual equilibrium, finding that balance point.
Exactly, mutual equilibrium. And the virtue this cultivates on an individual level is contentment.
Contentment, like being okay with living within what you've actually earned and deserved.
Yes, a sense of peace with that balance. Now, flip it to the receiver side, say the child again. Applying balance means they also must contribute.
Even young children. How?
Even if they're very young, the sources say their minimum contribution can simply be showing genuine appreciation. That's a form of giving back.
Okay.
And then as they get older, they naturally start taking on age-appropriate responsibilities, duties, contributing more tangibly.
And is there like a baseline contribution everyone needs to make?
Yes, a crucial one. They must be taught, fundamentally, to contribute to the peace and harmony of the household just through their behavior.
So just by being considerate, respectful, that itself is a contribution to the balance.
It sets the minimum standard for being a balanced member of any community, really, small or large.
Okay, so if this law of giving and taking, this balance, were somehow implemented more widely, what would that look like for society as a whole? What are the predicted effects?
Well, the sources are pretty optimistic on that front. They predict a gradual fading of many common vices, things like greed, avarice, that constant feeling of discontentment, envy.
That whole keeping up with the Joneses pressure.
Exactly that. That pressure eases when the focus shifts from endless taking to balanced contribution and contentment.
And connecting this to current problems, does this imbalance relate to some of the crises we see?
Oh, absolutely. The sources draw a direct line. They point out that when many individuals live consistently above their means, taking more than they give in real value, their ever-increasing need for money starts to fuel inflation.
Which then hurts those who are living in balance.
Precisely. It cripples those whose perhaps more modest, balanced pay simply can't keep up with artificially inflated costs of living.
And what about the human cost? The
Yeah.
stress, the burnout from chasing that extra income.
That's another huge point the sources make. The devastating spiritual cost, the psychic strain, the sheer time and life energy poured into just keeping up financially, that's almost completely ignored by current leadership models.
It's just seen as collateral damage.
Well,
Or the cost of doing business.
pretty much. And this disregard for balance, this acceptance of widespread imbalance, you see it mirrored in governmental policies too, don't you?
How so?
Think about massive deficit spending, bloated consumerism that's largely funded by ever-increasing personal and corporate debt.
It's like the whole system is built on taking now, paying later, or maybe never.
Exactly. It's an inherently unsustainable structure, built on imbalance. And according to these sources, the inevitable result is, well, collapse.
Okay, that's a stark warning. So if people naturally look to leaders to guide them, especially in turbulent times, what does true leadership look like in this new paradigm? They can't just be managers, right? They need to be guides.
That's the core idea. They must be guides. And becoming that kind of true spiritual guardian has prerequisites. It's not just about charisma or a fancy title.
What does it require then?
First and foremost, an intimate knowledge of these laws of creation we've been talking about. Not just knowing about them, but knowing them deeply.
And that knowledge has to change the person.
It must. It has to manifest in the ennoblement of the guardian's own nature.
Ennoblement, like a refinement, an elevation of their inner character.
Yes, exactly. It's about cultivating qualities like justice, compassion, purity, integrity. So much so that these qualities become second nature.
So they aren't just acting noble, they are noble. And that makes them beacons.
Precisely. They become beacons of light simply through the naturalness of their being. It radiates outwards. It's not something you achieve just through intellectual study or getting degrees. It's an organic state.
But surely understanding people requires some kind of knowledge.
Oh, definitely. But it's not just intellectual knowledge. A true spiritual guide needs to develop an inner ability, a capacity to sort of survey the whole spectrum of human maturity, to gain a wise recognition of the soul, not just the personality.
A recognition of the soul, how do you develop that?
It requires what the sources call an enlivened intuitive perception.
Intuition, like a gut feeling.
Deeper than that, a finely tuned inner sense, a way of perceiving people beyond the superficial, beyond their masks or their intellectual cleverness.
And there's a warning attached to this, isn't there?
Yeah.
About getting it wrong.
A very stark warning. If a leader confuses this deep, intuitive assessment with judging by externals, appearances, status, intellectual arguments, they will fail, utterly. They'll misdirect their energy. They'll end up trying to help the wrong people or helping the right people in the wrong way because they haven't truly perceived the inner need or the inner reality. It leads to wasted effort and potential harm. Now, putting this into the bigger context, our sources are quite clear that the times ahead demand a radical change in humanity's spiritual orientation.
Radical change, that sounds intense.
It is. Survival through what they describe as potentially centuries of drastic change depends on regaining conviction in these laws of creation and ultimately abiding by the will of God, as they phrase it.
Centuries. Wow. And within that context, there's some tough advice about offering help, isn't there?
There is. It feels quite jarring to modern ears, perhaps. The advice is essentially that help should now only be given to those who truly seek it.
Only those who truly seek. That sounds exclusionary, maybe even judgmental, especially when we often talk about unconditional compassion.
It does sound strict. The analogy the sources use helps explain the reasoning. It takes one bad apple to ruin a barrel. Meaning, if a guide expends their vital energy on individuals who aren't genuinely seeking change, who aren't ready or willing to make the effort themselves, that energy is not only wasted, but can actually dilute the guide's strength and potentially drag them down.
So it's about protecting the integrity of the help being offered.
And ensuring it lands where it can actually bear fruit. It's not about lacking compassion. True leadership, they say, requires a truly living capacity for compassion. But, and this is key, it must be coupled with wisdom.
Wisdom to offer real help, not just enabling.
Exactly. The sources suggest only those who can genuinely empathize with the inner pain and struggle of others can truly understand their mindset. And it's through that deep understanding that they can help open a path to grace, to real change.
But there's always a fundamental limit, right? Even for the wisest guide.
Always. The absolute limit is the free will of the other person. A true leader must always, always heed that.
So they illuminate the path, they show the way.
But they cannot and must not force anyone to walk it. The choice remains entirely with the individual.
This whole perspective really shifts the definition of leadership, doesn't it? It becomes much, much broader than just having a formal title.
Immensely broader. The sources state that anyone who is in a position to influence another person's development or future has, in effect, taken on the duties and responsibilities of a leader.
Anyone. So
Like having a child. That makes you a leader for that child. Being a teacher, being a mentor, even just being an older sibling sometimes. If you can shape someone's path, you've accepted a responsibility.
Wow. That's a staggering level of responsibility. Most people probably don't think of it that way.
Probably not. But the sources emphasize that this kind of spiritual leadership is not something to be taken lightly at all.
And the consequences of failing.
They are described as potentially fatal to the leader. Failure or misguidance of even one person under your influence, even if it's through negligence, not bad intent, carries heavy consequences.
Fatal in what sense? Spiritually fatal.
That seems to be the implication. It sets the stakes incredibly high for this emerging era, all governed by that irrefutable law we mentioned earlier.
Right. To whom much is given, from him is much required.
Precisely. And the critical point for the times ahead is that the consequences for violating these laws, for failing in that responsibility, are expected to become much more, well, instantaneous and drastic than perhaps they've been in the past. The feedback loop tightens.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize this. We're talking about a massive paradigm shift in leadership, moving away from old models.
Right. The new era, according to these sources, demands leadership that's spiritually attuned, grounded fundamentally in this law of balanced giving, must be commensurate with taking.
And the leaders themselves need to be different, not just smart or skilled managers, but
inwardly ennobled guides. People whose focus is genuinely on fostering the spiritual growth of others, moving away from systems built purely on, greed, external status, or just intellectual cleverness.
It's a profound shift from the external to the internal. So let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on. The sources, these knowing ones, as they're sometimes called, suggest that the really drastic changes tied to this shift in spiritual orientation, they might not be quick. They could unfold over centuries.
Yes, that perspective is quite humbling.
It really is. And it raises a huge question for all of us, doesn't it? If these principles are meant for a transformation that could span centuries, like a fundamental rewrite of our entire global operating system, how on earth do we begin to apply them in our own lives? Right here, right now, in this incredibly fast-paced world we live in today?
That's the challenge, isn't it? How to bridge that vast timescale with our immediate reality.
Something to definitely reflect on. That's your deep dive for today.